I think what the Russians have done is a failure. They have failed to take Kyiv. They've failed to take Odessa. They've failed to go over the Dnieper River. Putin's definition of winning is not my definition. I think he has failed. I think Russia has failed. The longer the days go by, I think it is better for Ukraine than it is for Russia in the long term.
General Kellogg, I want to start with your current role. In early January, you stepped down as President Trump's special envoy for Ukraine. What is your role now, and what are you focused on at this stage?
Well, I've moved over to a think tank here in Washington, D.C. Special envoys have basically 6 months and then 6 months. And after that, they have to go through a confirmation process. And I wanted to spend more time on the outside where I could be much more open and free to talk about Ukraine than I was inside the government. So I backed away from it now with a think tank. It's called America First Policy Institute. It's where I was at before I went back into the administration. So I'm back there writing, thinking, talking to people, and trying to influence people as we go forward.
When it became known that you were stepping down, there was speculation that internal pressures or policy disagreements with the administration may have played a role. Is any of that true?
No, none of it's true. It's just it was a timing issue. It was a time to move and time to go on. They were doing the special envoys that were out there, that were doing a lot of the work. Stephen Woodcock was there, Jared Kushner was there, and there was a lot of talk with the Ukrainian team and the Russian team as well. So no, there's absolutely no truth to any type of friction or imbalance at all. It just gives me a time to do something different. It goes back to an era I was comfortable in writing and talking about it and being on the newsways.
That's actually pretty interesting. During your time in the administration, you worked closely with Ukrainian officials, but not directly with the Russian side. Some reports suggest that Moscow may have avoided engaging with you because you were seen as too pro-Ukrainian. Do you think that's accurate?
Well, the fact is that we had a separate envoy for Russia in Steve Woodcock, and then I had Ukraine, and we divided it up, and he worked with because he knew an individual by the name of Kirill Dmitriev personally from business dealings in the past, and it made sense for both the sides to work together. I don't think the Russians necessarily wanted me to be on that part of the team, and that was fine with me. I had enough things to be working with the Ukrainian team and bringing it back to the White House.
And let's go back to February 2025, when President Zelensky's first meeting with President Trump turned into a heated exchange in the Oval Office. Is that true that you advised President Zelensky not to go to that meeting at the time?
No, I did not. No, in fact, that morning we actually went to the hotel. It was called the Hay Adams, where we had a group meeting with the Ukrainian team and numerous members of the Senate and ourselves. And we just said, this is the way we think it would be best to approach the President of the United States inside the Oval Office. That was kind of upended there in the Oval Office, primarily because of the press. When the press started asking argumentative questions, and then it had been derailed. You know, before that, how it worked was, before the press had come in, there was a bilateral meeting. It was between the Ukrainian team and the American team, and it was cordial and everything was fine. It was when the press came in and started, that was asked those rather, some could say, argumentative questions, that the talks kind of broken down at that time. No, but until then, it was fine.
And another defining moment was President Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin in Alaska. In your view, was that meeting necessary, and what was the strategic purpose behind it?
Well, I think those meetings are always necessary. You know, remember, for the 4 years before that, President Biden did not even meet with President Putin at all, didn't even call him. And I believe it's important for anybody of any stature, president, chancellor, prime minister, you have to talk to everybody to get the correct end state. So I think what you saw in Alaska was the president asked President Putin to come to Alaska, which he did. They had talks in there. Remember now, immediately following that, within 48 to 72 hours, the President of the United States invited European leaders and President Zelensky back to the White House, and he talked with them as well. So it was not just one-sided. It was dual-sided, both-sided, that he was able to talk to both sides. I think that's important. I think as long as you keep the lines of communication open, I think it's both sides are well served by that. And I think that's what we saw happen.
Did President Trump genuinely believe Russia might make concessions after that meeting?
Well, I think that I don't speak for the president, and I wouldn't speak for the president, and I don't think we're talking about concessions. I think we're talking about what is going to happen between Ukraine and Russia And they're primarily talking about Donetsk is where they're really talking about the land there, not Luhansk, but Donetsk. I will tell you though, I think what the Russians have done is a failure. They have failed to take Kyiv, they've failed to take Odessa, they've failed to go over the Dnieper River. Because of their action, they've added 2 members of NATO. When you have Sweden and you have Finland, they've increased the border they've got to protect now with the Finnish border. So this is one of those, if Putin's definition of winning is not my definition. I think he has failed. I think Russia has failed. I think it's reached a point where he's trying to figure how to get out of this in the best way possible. I think Ukraine has done very well. They've fought very well. They've held their positions very well. So I think that's what we're seeing right now. And I know it's a tough winter right now. I think when you come out of the winter, the longer the days go by, I think it is better for Ukraine than it is for Russia in the long term. When you look at what they've done, this war has gone on for 4 years. When you go back historically, they were in Berlin in less than 4 years, from the time they went from Moscow to Berlin. And they've only been able to take 1% more land than they took from the start of the new invasion, or from the old invasion 4 years ago. So I think when you look at what is happening with Ukraine and with Russia and what's happening in Europe, I think right now, once you get through the winter, and I know it's hard, I know it's very tough, I think it's better for Ukraine than it is for Russia.
It's been a year since President Trump began trying to end the war, but there is still no meaningful breakthrough. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it comes down to territory. I think it comes down to when you look at the 4 oblasts we're talking about, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhnyy, and Kherson, the real one they're talking about is Donetsk. And it's all about land. He wants the land, and Ukraine's not willing to give up the land unless they fight for it. And then they're talking now, when they get into the peace talks with Budanov and the rest of the team, they're talking about setting up some type of demilitarized zone, an economic zone. And I think part of that is going to be what kind of security guarantees will be given to Ukraine to make sure this doesn't start again. I'm a big believer in that once this war winds down, once it ends, it's not going to start again. I think with somebody like President Putin or anybody who follows him, they do not want to start this war again. It has been too catastrophic for them. The price they've paid is enormous in equipment and in petrol, and soldiers as well. So I think once it stops, it's not going to start again.
We are now seeing a new phase of diplomacy. Ukraine and Russia, they are again engaged in direct talks with US and was participating. Do you see this as a genuine opportunity to end the war?
Well, it's going to depend on the Russians. I think the Ukrainians are in a good position. I think there's an American term, it's called in the box. And I think Ukrainians are in the box, and we've got them in a pretty good position. It's all depending on President Putin and Russia and what he wants to do. So when they go into those talks this week, I guess in the next 2 days, it's going to be interesting to see what the Russian position is. They're bringing Kirill Dmitriev in. They're bringing in an economic issue, but it's really raw power. And where does Putin want to be? I think he's now reached a point where his losses have been so severe, and when the losses, but economic and personal, that he's trying to find a way out of this. And I don't think when he sits there and President Putin says he's winning, I don't think he's winning this war. I think historically, when you sit back, they're going to find that they've actually failed in this fight as they've gone forward. Ukrainians have done very well. I know and again, I go back to what I said a few minutes ago. I know it's hard right now. I know the winter's hard right now. I know they've attacked the energy sources. I've got that. But it's one of those things I'd say, hold out a little bit longer. Things are going to go fine. Once we get into the warmer months, it's going to be advantage Ukraine, not advantage Russia.
Some critics say the Trump administration should have applied more pressure on Moscow, and others point to the Biden administration's military support and sanctions, and they say the pressure alone hasn't stopped the war. From your perspective, what actually works with Moscow?
Well, I think that's up to the President of the United States, and he's got his views on it, and I won't speak for the President, where he's at, and I know what he's wanted. He's applied metered pressure on there. When you look at the sanctions and you look at the ghost fleet, what we call the sanctioned fleet out there, when you look at the oil problem he's got right now, when you look at the fact that he's sanctioned Lukoil and Rosneft, 2 of the major producers of oil. So he's got it, he's looking at it in a holistic way to eventually bring to a peace that is a sustainable peace that does not start again. And you have to basically listen to both sides and get the results from both sides of what you want to do. He just wants the war to end. When you look at the amount of casualties and the damage that's happened in Ukraine, he just wants it to stop. And I think that's a good position to be in.
What's also interesting, throughout the year, President Trump at times said Vladimir Putin was ready to end the war. But on the grounds, what we saw that Russia was intensifying its attacks and showing no real willingness to stop. During your time in the administration, did you see any real signs that Russia was ready to end the war?
Well, I think it's all up to the calculus in his own mind. I mean, the fact that he believes he's winning the war. He has said that. He's not. And the calculus is you have to make sure he understands you're not winning this war. You're not going to get to the point you want to be on making Ukraine part of this, what I would say is the old Soviet Empire, part of the Russian Empire. You're not going to get there. You just have to make him believe he cannot accomplish his goals. So it's a personal issue. I think it's personal with Putin. I think with Putin realizes that he's not winning, if he realizes that, he's got major problems economically. He's got problems domestically. He's got problems with soldiers out there. And I think he's going to have to understand that. I think his advisors do. You're starting to see a little bit of fractures in that. And as long as he understands that, he's got to cut a deal for himself, cut a deal for Ukraine. Ukraine will survive as a nation. I have no doubt in my mind that it will. And it just has to make sure that you're not going to, as we would say, take the whole thing. It's not going to happen.
You've previously made an interesting point about Ukraine's position. You said that if Ukraine makes it through the winter, the advantage would shift in Kyiv's favor. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, sure, because anytime the warm weather starts up, you have your drone warfare fighting. And the advantage that Moscow's always had, they've had it in World War II, they had it with Napoleon. They've always hoped that winter weather would hurt the opposition, the adversary. So you get through the winter, and again, at the third time I've said it, I know it's hard in Kyiv. I know it's hard. The temperatures are really low. But get through the winter months, and then you get into the summer months, and the advantage does not accrue to the Russians. The advantage accrues to the Ukrainians as well, and also the Western powers.
And I want to also ask you about the end game. How do you think this war ultimately ends, and on what timeline? And do you believe any settlement will require Ukraine to make maximalist territorial concessions? For example, withdrawal from Donbas that Russia insists on.
Yeah, what I think the fact of the matter is that has happened in the past. And it's one of those, you almost have to sit back and realistically say, are you going to get that land back that you have lost? Yes or no? And you have to answer that question. So it's like Crimea, which they took in 2014. What you do not want to have happen is do not want them to recognize it legally, make it de jure. You want to be de facto. The reason I say that, if you look back to World War II with the Baltic States, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, they kept their embassies open here. And it was by de facto, not by de jure. It was what we in America called the Wells Doctrine. And the Wells Doctrine was no nation you recognize no land that was conquered through aggression. So that happened in World War II. I think the same thing is going to happen here. I think the same thing had happened with, example, at the end of World War II, when you had Chancellor of Germany, Chancellor Konrad Adenauer. He wanted to have a united Germany. He was hoping for a united Germany, both East and West Germany. That was not going to happen early on, but it was going to happen later. And I think one of those, you have to be a realist about what is really happening. You can't say we want all the land back, because that is probably not going to happen. So you get the best of what's going to happen in both worlds, don't recognize it legally, and then over time you hope that it changes. Oh, and I think it will.
And on a more personal note, are you planning to visit Ukraine anytime soon?
Yes, I
President
am.
Zelensky
I,
has.
I will be. I will be back to Ukraine. Of course, I will. I want the weather to warm up a little bit, but yes, we'll be back to Ukraine. We will be back there, going to Kyiv and meeting with the people as well. So yes, it'll happen in the near term.
President Zelensky has joked that Russian attacks on Kyiv seemed to pause whenever you were in the city. They reacted
Yeah.
like a Patriot system. Have you heard this remark?
Yes, I have. In fact, I was in the audience when he said it as part of the YES conference when we were there a few months ago. When we were at the, I believe, the Intercontinental. we were there for a meeting and I heard him say it personally. So yes, but it's go back and see where we're at and just see how the conditions are. So it'll be yes, that'll be true. I'll come back.
Hi, I'm Tim. I cover politics and current affairs at the Kyiv Independent. Interviews like this are only possible because of the support from our members. The steady backing helps us keep doing independent journalism from Ukraine. Thanks for being with us. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel for more reporting like this, and consider becoming a paid member of the Kyiv Independent. It starts at just $5 a month and makes a real difference.